us as a congregation to fill our pulpit 2 to 3 Sundays every month. As a member of the worship team, placing all of this responsibility on the 4 of us is a heavy lift. We are excited to share that we have filled most of the Sundays for the coming church year. However, there are many other worship-related tasks that need to be done, so some extra help is needed. Most of the tasks will require only a couple of hours a month. I encourage you to volunteer when we put out a call so we can continue to provide the same great services that you're used to. And the first task that we're looking for help with is we're looking for some Zoom hosts for Sunday morning services. We've been really, really lucky that for the past 4 years, we've had 3 or 4 people that have consistently volunteered for this position, but they're getting tired. So we would like to add 3 or 4 more people so that the Zoom host would only have to host maybe once every 6 to 8 weeks. The qualifications are you just need to feel comfortable on Zoom. You don't need to be a high-tech AV person. We will train you on the Zoom-specific tasks for Sunday mornings. If you're interested in that, please see a member of the worship team. So that would be Anne, myself, Linda, Lisa, that are here today. Also, another task, not for us, but for membership, they are looking for Sunday morning greeters. So if you're willing to be a greeter on Sunday morning, Cindy is looking again for a few people so that greeters would only have to greet every 6 to 8 weeks or so. So see Cindy if you are willing to sign up to be a greeter. You want to talk about our new art installation?
I do. Before I start, Dean, we're hearing that there's trouble with the mic, and I'm wondering if you could do a mic check for us somehow. It's the mic at the podium that I'm speaking at right now.
Is the green light on in the little post?
Yes, it is.
Oh, moved that.
All right, and please don't be grabbing it.
Yes. All right. Can people hear me right now?
You're coming through fine, and there's audio going out on Zoom.
Okay, so. Okay, so it's.
You don't hear it from there because the echo cancellation creates a dead zone around you.
We can talk about this another time, but it sounds like we're good on Zoom, and thank you very much for checking. I appreciate it.
Our Zoom host can hear you fine.
Perfect, thank you. So today, I wanted to thank a number of people in the congregation for putting up this beautiful first effort for the Art Center. We have paintings all around the room, if you notice today, brightening up the space. They were done by an artist named Ann Hunter. And for the installation, Lori Pandit had help from Roby, Caroline McDonald, and Sally Manning. And so it's lovely to see the tradition continue. Now, Ann Hunter is the instructor behind Creative Touch Studio in Marlboro. It's the studio where she helps people create works of art and creates them herself. So she also teaches painting at the senior centers in Northboro, Marlboro, and Westboro. So take a look and maybe it might be of interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. I am always moved when I encounter people who can't help themselves from being passionate and doing things against their own practical self-interest. Thomas Starr King was such a person. As a minister in Boston for 15 years, he grew his church by 5 times, and then, after being offered jobs back in his hometown of New York City, decided to go to California to fight to spread Unitarian Universalism and end slavery. I wish my own motivations were so selfless and noble. I am not that good. Today, our service is about UU history, the story of one of our best, Thomas Starr King.
This morning, we light this chalice to affirm that new light is ever waiting to break through to enlighten our ways. That new truth is ever waiting to break through to illuminate our minds. And that new love is ever waiting to break through to warm our hearts. May we be open to this light and to the rich possibilities that it brings. Please rise as you are able and sing hymn 131 with us. Love will guide us. Now a reading. In this sermon today, we're going to talk with you about a man you may have just heard of for the first time. This man named Thomas Starr King. Starr King, doesn't it sound kind of trendy, kind of cool? He lived his life with a lot of passion, as Anne said, and he did the difficult next thing. In the spirit of the way he lived his life, I have a challenge for you. Today, consider as best you can that one of the things you can do with your life is to do something ridiculously good for the sake of others and not you. I want you, I'm ready for the challenge too, to do something for the sake of others that does not benefit you, not directly. Actually, to be more specific, do something that holds you back, that costs you something. I want you to remember that as you walk through life, not everything you do should be for your own benefit. I want you to do something for somebody else. Ideally, it should be something that gets in the way of your plans and your interest. I don't want you to plan for this. I don't want you to do it to get it out of the way. You will absolutely know the opportunity when it arises. So right now, we will share joys and sorrows. And this tradition of sharing joys and sorrows is a ritual observed in some faith communities. It's a time to briefly share and witness one another's sharing as an act of worship to those special moments of joy or sorrow in our living. We do this in faith that a joy shared increases joy in the world, and a sorrow or burden shared lightens the load, knowing that others are holding us in love during our challenging moments. If you're here in the meeting house, please come forward and line up, as we do, to speak at the microphone. Share your name, even if you think everybody knows your name. And if you're on Zoom and wish to share, please raise your hand physically or the Zoom hand icon and remain. Let's remain seated as we join together singing words on the screen. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. A prayer to that unnameable spirit that moves through the world to the deepest places in our heart, to God. We ask for a listening ear. In a nation born with the highest aspiration of that honesty and truth rule, today we pray for our media and leaders. May those that deliver the news see it as the sacred duty it is, and may we as consumers and even more citizens of this country see the power of what we see and hear. May we, as people of faith in this age, be wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, that we too have a diet of information that pours in and defines us. We pray in an old-fashioned way for those who are exploited, silenced, oppressed. May it not be so. And quite simply, may the news that can be so dark not define our times and strip our hope. May also the news that all around us there are works of love and peace that glue us together also be told now. It's my prayer that we not be blind, that the handful of forces that are television, radio, cable, printing, publishing, movie, music production, and everything in between be the only ones that tell the story of our times. And just as we strive to be innocent as doves, may we also be wise as serpents, understanding the consequences to our democracy of this concentration of media power. We naturally pray that those who are sick get well, those who are hungry find food, those that are vulnerable find security. But as much as that may be the basic principles of intelligence and honesty, prudence and bravery define the character and behavior of those entrusted with shaping the way we see our times. Amen.
The sermon today was written by our own Stephen Wilson. It has been edited and adapted for our service today. Star King, spelled with 2 R's, Thomas Star King, actually. He was born in the Big Apple in 1825. He was a PK, or preacher's kid, and aspired to follow in his father's footsteps. Being a minister was really the only dream our UU hero of the day ever reported having. His dad's life as a preacher kept them on the move, with stops at Universalist churches in the towns of Hudson, New York, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and eventually Charlestown, Massachusetts. Sadly, 5 years after settling the family in the Boston area, Thomas's father died. Thomas was 15 years old. 15. The death of his father meant that Thomas, or Star as he would come to mostly be known, had to drop out of school and go to work. Now the breadwinner for his family, he began working at the nearby Charlestown Navy Yard. He quickly graduated to the role of the bookkeeper. The sobering loss of his father and the immediate economic struggle that ensued did not dissuade our young hero from giving up on his dream of entering the ministry. In his free time, Star King took classes and attended lectures at Harvard University, still primarily a divinity school. At that time, Harvard and the Navy Yard had a collaboration that allowed shipyard employees access to classes. King took advantage of this unique opportunity. Undaunted from being unable to afford formally enrolling in school, Star King continued to read voraciously and absorbed as much as he could from lectures and intermittent classes he had time for. He also took inspiration and guidance from the local liberal religious theological stars that filled Boston with new faiths of Unitarianism and Universalism. His city was at that time the intellectual capital of the country. And for Star, this turned out to be a perfect petri dish of both challenge and opportunity. The teenage Thomas Star King had grit, brains, and a golden voice that emanated from a frame that had not and would not ever grow or look more than that of a young teenager, growing to just over 5 feet and never weighing more than 120 pounds. Little did he or anyone know our slightly built hero would in short order join the ranks of the cast of theological stars that commanded Boston's attention. Having to work to support his family, he never did finish school. In fact, he never even enrolled. However, he was diligent and talented to have one of his own sermons published by the age of 13. And throughout his teens gathered around him an impressive network of informal mentoring relationships. Star studied directly with Hosea Ballou and was informally mentored by his dad's predecessor, the Reverend Edwin Chapman, at the church of his youth. In fact, he even had a wildly popular Reverend Theodore Parker working on his behalf to find him pulpits to guest preach in. At 20, clearly bright and unquestionably inspired, the young Star took over the ministry of his father's old church in Charlestown. Initially, Star was uncomfortable preaching to those who knew him as the former pastor's boy, but his discomfort would soon fade. He was, in short order, competent enough to lead this small congregation, and soon capable of much more than that. Star was talented, smart, relentless, and increasingly fearless. Emerson, never afraid to critique his peers for their lack of eloquence or relevance to real life, after hearing our rising star in the pulpit, exclaimed, "Now that's preaching." Star served his father's church for the first 5 years of his 20s, before in 1949 was appointed pastor of the Hollis Street Church in Boston. He took this position largely because of the church's staunch anti-slavery policy. He would remain its minister for the next 11 years. Accepting the role at the Hollis Street Unitarian Church meant that he shifted his denominational affiliation from Universalist to Unitarian. He cared little about what clearly small distinctions between these two traditions. When asked about the shift between traditions, he quipped that the only reason Unitarians and Universalists had not already merged was that they were too near kin to get married. He was right. Always entertaining and quick-witted, King would later add to our tradition's long history of sharp self-reflection the apt and often repeated summary that Universalists think that God is too good to damn them forever, and the Unitarians think they are too good to be damned. It was shortly after he began at the Hollis Street Church that he wed Julia Wiggin, who he remained married to for his whole life. Settling in at the Hollis Street Church, he both began to pull that church out of financial trouble and began lecturing publicly to spread his views and to support his family. By the time Starr was 30, he had entered the ranks of the most respected and popular speakers of the era. Starr had talent at reaching and moving the general public. Starr King's wit and capacity to relate to different audiences was growing, and, spoiler alert, would more fully be put to the test in upcoming years when he preached to hostile crowds in California. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. In the city that had Emerson, Parker, and Channing in it, Reverend King had come to live up to his cool rock star name and become one of the most successful preachers in the city. In those 11 years, as the Hollis Street pastor, he pulled the church out of debt, grew its membership by 5 times its original size. In fact, by the mid-1850s, nobody in Boston had more Facebook followers than he did. Nobody. We all know he got famous because of his sharp tweets. Seriously, what is true is that because of his achievements as a scholar and minister, Harvard University awarded King an honorary Master of Arts. Fame already established, Starr now even had formal academic credentials. Nothing truer can be said than Starr was a relentlessly productive person. The only real R&R we learned about him ever taking place was the pleasure he had in exploring the White Mountains of New Hampshire. But even then, presumably on vacation, he was working. He published a book about the area titled The White Hills, Their Legends, Landscapes, and Poetry. Starr was seriously a productive person. However, his vigorous lifestyle was catching up to him, ministering to his growing congregation while spending so much time as a traveling lecturer began to wear on him. Now famous, successful, and formally credentialed by Harvard, in 1959, King sought a new ministerial post, one that would pay him enough that he would not have to travel and lecture so much. However, it seemed that this moment of wanting an easier schedule was just a passing fancy for him. Far truer to his will and nature was a relentless desire to make a difference. Fueled by that drive, King accepted a post at the First Unitarian Church of San Francisco. He chose San Francisco over opportunities in Chicago, Cincinnati, New York City, and his own hometown of Boston, specifically because it appeared to him to be both the greatest challenge available and the place in which he could have the most impact. Starr wanted nothing more to be a brave ambassador of the liberal religious values he trained himself on all of his life. As history would have it, this move came at a time when a national civil war was brewing and states were sorting out their loyalties. So it must be said that King went to California with a somewhat defined mission. He was going to seriously help keep this distant state, California, in the Union. As it turned out, nobody could have done that task better. So in 1860, at the ripe old age of 35, Starr and his family headed to San Francisco. With the nation's railroad system still a decade from being fully linked coast to coast, Starr and his family traveled to New York City, where they then sailed south to the east side of Central America, across the Isthmus of Panama on land. The Panama Canal was barely a dream, and took a rickety ship, reportedly full of rats, up the west coast to the Bay Area. Like most who immigrated west, back in those days, this adventure was usually a one-way ticket, and Starr never saw the East again. Frankly, as fate would have it, he wouldn't really live that much longer. It's hard to fathom, but his next few years would turn out to be his most productive, hard-driving, and impressive yet. It would also be a pace that would eventually kill him, but again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. As impressive as this minister from Boston would turn out to be, when he first arrived in San Francisco, he was so physically unassuming that his new congregation didn't believe that this was their new pastor. Parishioners are recorded asking, could this youthful person with his beardless, boyish face be the celebrated minister from Boston? The answer, of course, was yes. Soon enough, people from hundreds of miles were coming to the First Unitarian Society Church to hear him preach. And preach he did. there in his new home church, and seemingly everywhere else too. He never met a soapbox he didn't like, and the way his history reads, from the time he dropped his suitcases in his newly adopted city and state, Starr began preaching and stumping for union politicians and campaigning to keep California in the Union. Trying to keep California from going Confederate was no small task. Starr left Boston knowing his adoptive state was vulnerable to seceding, in part because many of the high-ranking officials leaned Confederate, and the chief advocate for staying in the Union had just been killed in a duel. The support for seceding from the Union was particularly strong in Southern California. It was even reported that during the 1860s, at least on one 4th of July celebration, the Confederate flag was raised over Los Angeles's main plaza. While he was busy making a difference in the politics of the day, King was pushing the values of the liberal church and lecturing outside the walls of the church in efforts to morally improve the culture. At the turn of the 20th century, Unitarians would adopt a phrase, salvation by character. King, along with other leading preachers of the mid-1800s, were way ahead of that slogan. In pulpits all over California, he spread the Unitarian and Universalist belief that it was not just our Christian duty to confess our sins, but to work to build our character. King preached about how right ideas mattered. He preached about how reason and adopting newly discovered truths were a crucial part of keeping religious faith from being idolatry to old ideas. He asked people to consider why so little of what we have learned changes our largest sentiments and religious life. Starr's gospel was that it was our highest calling to be of humble service. The always witty King frequently asked of himself, I may barely weigh 120 pounds, but when I am angry, I weigh a ton. Slight as he was physically, as forward-thinking as he was theologically, Starr always brought the heat. He railed powerfully against injustice. Starr makes me want to be a better person. His sermons, read from manuscript in a deep and resonant voice, were both philosophically and literary. The goodness of God, the beauty of creation, and the progress of humankind were the inspirations King evoked in his preaching to draw people to a life committed to the good. Starr believed that Christianity was not best summarized by the institutions of the church, but was like a seed that lived inside people and institutions and drove them to be better. Our Starr was not a man of letters as much as he was a man of action. Starr was never more a star than in those days prior to the Civil War. At one mass rally in San Francisco, 40,000 people turned out to hear him speak. 40,000. All over, at efforts to support Lincoln's campaign for president, the American flag frequently draped over the pulpit or podium. Starr King was not so humble prophet of Unitarian. Standing there, he reminded the crowds of former President Washington's brave struggle and sacrifice to build this country not even a century earlier. In the election that brought Lincoln the presidency, Lincoln carried California by only 711 votes. 711 votes. Abraham Lincoln said he believed the Reverend Thomas Starr King was the person most responsible for keeping California in the Union during the early days of the Civil War. With even the scantest understanding of where Starr went in the 4 years between his arrival on the coast and his death, we can only imagine he must have never turned down an effort to stump for a pro-union leader or a rally to end slavery in his newly adopted state. For candidates running for office, for soldiers in need of medical supplies, and of victims of natural disasters, Starr drew a crowd. Relentlessly, he pushed that California remain loyal to the Union. And he did so not just to friendly rallies full of sympathetic people with boldly colored hats. Starr had the grit to hold court in naturally hostile environments too. To loosen up crowds in mining camps sympathetic to the Confederacy, Starr learned to lead his speeches with jokes, and after lecturing, to stay to shoot pool with the miners. Starr mused in a moment of self-reflection that he never knew the exhilaration of public oratory until he faced a row of men armed with Bowie knives and revolvers. Starr worked hard. His approach worked enough to keep him alive until he was the state's chief anti-slavery advocate. His campaign for Republican candidates at the state level helped elect a Republican governor and a pro-union coalition to the state house. Our Starr was not only a public figure, but a very successful minister. In his first year, he managed to raise enough money to pay the substantial debt of the church off, and in 2 years, build its funds and endowment, had a new church built in the 4 years of 1864. The first Unitarian Society is in downtown San Francisco today, sitting on a street named for him. In his free time, he joined the Freemasons and served as the grand orator of his lodge. Of course he did. I can't seem to find the time to clean my house. The battle to keep California in the Union won. King now turned to the needs of the vast number of wounded soldiers, limited medical supplies, and provisions. In this task, King organized fundraising for the United States Sanitary Commission, a civil organization charged with overseeing the health and medical care of the United States Army. The Sanitary Commission would eventually become the Red Cross. By the end of the war, California, with Starr as its chief fundraiser, had donated 1/4 of all of the money that was received by the Sanitary Commission. Following his campaign for soldiers' medical care, King found himself raising funds for flood and drought relief and carved out time to work for the rights of San Francisco's African American and Chinese communities. Again, of course he did. We know, said Edward Everett Hale of King, that there is a heart as large as the world, so that you cannot make it understand that should hold back from any service to be rendered to any human being. Starr calls us all to be better people. The trouble with writing biographies about heroes and heroines of your own tradition is that it can be as depressing as inspiring. We might ask, when did he sleep? How did he serve a growing church while he was traveling around his large state prior to the invention of cars or planes? What gave? What got lost? As someone who wants to make a difference without losing the casual comforts of my own life, it seems like a magic trick I both want to and fear learning to do. King's success in patriotic and charitable causes led powerful friends to encourage him to run for the U.S. Senate. He refused, saying that he feared it would lead to political compromise and impair his willingness to be frank and honest. Despite a schedule even more hard driving than it was back east, our good Reverend did get a chance to mix a little hiking and tourism into his speaking engagements and ministering. Just as he had found time to steal away to hike the White Mountains in New Hampshire, while touring about on speaking engagements in California, he got to the wilds as well. He is listed among the first 100 European Americans to visit Lake Tahoe, and when he passed to visit Yosemite, he was taken by its beauty enough to write and preach a series of sermons on its majesty. He published those pieces and sent those letters back east to be published in Boston. In one of those letters, he called Yosemite Valley and its giant trees Beethoven's Ninth Symphony set in granite. His brief forays into Yosemite facilitated an alliance with fellow abolitionist and landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted to protect Yosemite by making it a state park, before years later it became a national one. For his love of the place and an advocacy in preserving the Yosemite Valley, a granite dome there, hovering over 13,000 feet, was named for him. Work as hard as this person did, and they named stuff after you. It's fair to say Starr King is a little Abraham Lincoln, a little John Muir, a little Emerson. As a small man with relentless energy and drive, I think it is fair to say he also had a little Napoleon in him. This pace, as it had back in Boston 5 years before, began to take its toll. This time, his obsessive pace really did catch up with him. Shortly after it was clear the Union would win the war, but before he could publish a book on the Sierras, Starr King was diagnosed with diphtheria and pneumonia and died days later in 1864. When California's only star, spelled with 2 R's, fell, flags in the Bay Area were dropped to half-mast, and the new state legislature at California's capital in Sacramento adjourned for 3 days of mourning. However, those are all tributes that could be ordered by officials. This fact speaks more importantly to how he is remembered. 20,000 people came to his church to pay tribute to him while he lay in state. 20,000 people in a state that at the time had about 40,000 people in it. That's 1 in 20 people. In 1913, King was voted one of California's 2 greatest heroes, and in 1931, California officially donated a bronze statue of King to be mounted in Statuary Hall in D.C. However, on August 31st, 2006, the California legislature approved a joint resolution to replace Thomas Starr King's statue in Statuary Hall with one of Ronald Reagan. In 2009, the statue of Starr was reinstalled in Sacramento. Another statue of him stands at Golden Gate Park. And 2 mountains, one in California and one in New Hampshire, bookending the country, are named for him. In the 1960s, the state designated King's Church the first Unitarian church of San Francisco, and his tomb there is a national monument. In 1941, the Pacific Unitarian School for the Ministry changed its name to Starr King School for the Ministry to honor the man of eloquence, commitment, and vision. Let's stop for just a minute and know that if this guy did not have the gumption, drive, and skill he did, you might not be sitting in a country that fought to end the vile truth that was slavery. Thank you, Thomas Starr King, for being more dedicated to the principles that we share, that we will ever likely be. You did what we seem to only muster in part. You gave so much of your life to our convictions and the future be something better. Starr King was the bomb, the man. I had heard Starr King's name, but really knew nothing about him until reading this sermon. I am grateful I had the opportunity to learn more about this great UU. Amen, and blessed be.
What a story. Each week, our financial offering is shared between the general operating fund of the church and a designated organization. For the month of August, in honor of our new minister and the needs we have ahead, we set aside the half plate to the minister's discretionary fund. May we continue to be as generous as we are able. The offering for the work of this congregation and the work of your discretionary fund will now be gratefully received, and we hope gratefully be given. And we will be sharing a video of the Thrive Choir singing the song, "We Shall Be Known."
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds to change the life from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Yay.
A great choice. Thank you. Please rise as you are able for hymn number 169, We Shall Overcome. Now for our closing words. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in mindless oblivion. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go without challenging yourself or others. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in utter ease and comfort. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace seeking justice. I mean go in peace committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. When I say go in peace, I mean go in the peace that is created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace.
Lots of leftover goodies.